Hello my dear friends, you're in the MilitarySummary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 4th of February of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And you know that since the beginning of the special military operation, during some period of time, the Russians were attacking the Ukrainians, then the Russians took small pause and Ukrainians were counter-attacking. For example, in 2022, the Russians were attacking in Lugansk, in Donetsk regions, then Ukrainians counter-attacking the Kharkiv direction. In 2023, we got the same situation. First, there were clashes for Bakhmut, then Ukrainians counter-attack in the area of Tokmak-Rabotina, that is massacring Rabotina situation. Then the Russians were attacking along the entire line of combat contact. Then the Ukrainians attacked in the area of Sudra. Now the Russians were attacking, and the Russians started their offensive operation in the late 2024. In the late 2023, we're talking about Avdiivka offensive operation. And most likely this offensive operation is about to be finished. Not because the Russians don't feel themselves that they are able to advance further. Of course they can, but the Ukrainians during this period of time, despite the rumors and talks that they suffered significant losses and many other different things, obviously all this time they were in defense. And just from simple logic, the Ukrainians should have less losses in comparison with the Russians. Yes, the Ukrainians had problems with corruption, with munition, with supply and support, but they were in defense. So why I'm trying to tell you this, because at several directions the Russians stopped their offensive operation, and for example during the previous 24 hours the Ukrainians counter-attack along the line of combat contact in many places, and they managed to restore some positions they lost during the Russian offensive. And I believe that this is very interesting. Maybe as for now the Ukrainians are trying to test the Russian defense belt to understand whether they are able to counter-attack the Russians and to restore control over the territories or not. So let's begin from the let's start from the beginning, and first we're going to talk about the settlement of Velika Novoselovka. As for this direction, this is probably the only direction where the Russians continue their offensive operation. I'll remind you that after the fall of the city of Velika Novoselovka, the Russians haven't been regrouping for 2 or 3 weeks. Most likely they finished regrouping, and during the previous 24 hours the Russians made lots of attempts to attack in Ukraine positions. But there is one important thing that the Russians haven't found a solution how to resolve it. First of all, we see this is the settlement of Velika Novoselovka, and if the Russians want to attack in the north and the northwestern direction, there are not so many places where they can do this. Basically, the weather is very bad. The weather is very bad, and the Russians can't attack through fields. The Russians can attack just along main roads. And when talking about this area, there are 2 roads in this area, 0510, that goes from the settlement of Shakhtarsk in the direction of Velika Novoselovka, and the road 0509 from the village of Zolotaya Niva in the direction of Velika Novoselovka. The third road, 0518, from Urozhaine to Velika Novoselovka. Why I'm telling you this, because if the Russians are going to attack further in the western direction, anyway, they're going to have to go through the settlement of Velika Novoselovka. For example, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions along the river of Mokry Yaly. In this video, for example, we can see how the Russians managed to discover the temporary deployment point of the armored forces of Ukraine, and when these positions were discovered, the Russians began bombing them. As a result of artillery strikes, the entire stronghold was completely destroyed. A little bit further in the northwestern direction, the Russians managed to discover the concentration of Ukrainian forces on the area of the settlement of Dnipro-Energia, and the Russians attacked this territory with FABs. So it's something like that was something like artillery preparation before the beginning of full-scale offensive. Now let's discuss what happened in Velika Novoselovka. Today, pro-Ukrainian sources, including Deep State and other pro-Ukrainian sources, published video of how they were bombing and attacking the Russian soldiers that were ambushed. Not Russian soldiers, but the Russian vehicles that were ambushed on the territory of Velika Novoselovka. In this video we can see another convoy, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 vehicles were moving in the direction of Velika Novoselovka. But then when they reached this intersection of roads, the Ukrainians began bombing and attacking them with drones, with artillery. Basically, the Russians were ambushed and they were destroyed. And you know that for the previous several days, the Ukrainians, more precisely the source from 110th Brigade, have been talking a lot that despite the fact that the Russians managed to take under control the settlement of Velika Novoselovka, now the Russians can find themselves inside of artillery pocket. The Russians are suffering losses. You know that when talking about this statement made by the 110th Brigade, maybe this is true, but not for 100%. I'll try to explain to you. So once again, the Russians can't attack through the fields. The Russians were bombing the settlements of Dnipro-Energia, some temporary deployment point along the Mokry Yala river, and now if the Russians want to attack in this area, they need to use roads, and the only way how, for example, to attack the settlement of Dnipro-Energia is, let's say, to start the movements, to begin the movements of the convoy somewhere in the area of Shakhtarska, then to move along 0510 road, then to get the northern part of Velika Novosilovka, then to get this intersection of roads, then to move along Zarichna Street in the direction of the settlement by the name of Novokamar, then moving through the settlement of Novokamar to begin assault operation in the direction of this company stronghold. So this is the only way how the Russians can do this. Of course, the Russians can use hundreds of soldiers, infantry, to go through fields to try to encircle, but it's so long, it's going to be probably very dangerous for the Russian soldiers that can be ambushed by the Ukrainian drones, and many other factors that most likely don't play in the favor of this idea to attack along the river of Mokry Yali using just infantry. So the Russians need to use vehicles, and once again, this is the only one way how to attack, and the Ukrainians established complete fire control over the most roads in the area of Velika Novosilovka. And every time when the Russians begin their offensive operation, the Ukrainians know exactly when, what time, which number, where exactly the Russians will get this intersection of roads, and the only thing the Ukrainians need to do is just to begin bombing and attacking this square without even targeting or aiming. So they just to bomb, and obviously sooner or later some of Russian vehicle will be damaged or destroyed, or maybe the entire convoy can be destroyed. Then you need just to send FPV drones and the offensive operation will be finished. So this is the situation in this area. There are a few important things. First of all, indeed the Ukrainians managed to establish control over the main roads. The Russians, due to the weather, can't use the broad front attacks. They need to use just roads. But another important thing is that the Russians intensify their activities. So they've been regrouping for a very long period of time, and now they began testing. They began testing the Ukrainian positions, and the most important, the Russians began checking and trying to find Ukrainian artillery systems. Obviously, during the next 2-3 weeks, the Russians will make more attempts to attack in this area, and the main purpose of these attacks would be to discover Ukrainian artillery positions. They will try to destroy as many as possible Ukrainian artillery systems, and then sooner or later, one of the possible offensive in the future will be successful, and the Russians will advance along the river of Mokry Yali, and maybe the Russians will take the settlement of Dnipro-Energia. But for now, this is just the beginning of this offensive or possible offensives in this area. So let's wait and see what is going to be next. Now let's discuss the situation in the area of Andriivka fortified area. As you can see, we have some changes on the ground in Russian favor. We have adjusted the map based on the video that was published by the Russian side. This video, let's take a look at this video, show us how 2 Russian soldiers were establishing a mine barrier on the road between the settlement of Udachne and the settlement of Vulakla. So this is something like the Russian sabotage and reconnaissance group that managed to enter this territory to establish mine and then successfully retreat towards more reliable positions. And later Ukrainians were trying to move through this area, and they got on this minefield, and the Ukrainian vehicle was completely destroyed. This video confirms that the Russians most likely have access to this area without any problems, and based on this video we have adjusted the map. So this video very important because now we see that the settlement of Dachna is about to be captured by the Russians, and most likely this is going to happen in the very near future. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Dnipro direction where the Russians continue their offensive operation. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours there were very heavy clashes on the line between the settlement of Sribne and the settlement of Zaporizhia. The Ukrainians understand the value of this area and they try to hold their positions as much as possible. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. This information was confirmed both by pro-Ukrainian, pro-Russian and neutral mappers. Let's take a look at how the map was changing. This is the situation, for example, by the end of the 3rd of February, and this is the situation by the beginning of by the end of the 4th of February. From Ukrainian side, we have just one video. This is it. Let's take a look at this video. In this video, we can see how the Ukrainian infantry fighting vehicle was retreating from the central part of the settlement of Sribne in the northern direction. Most likely, the Ukrainians were trying to save servicemen from Russian attacks or something like this. So if we go back to map, the Ukrainians were moving from the central part, from the area of Sribne school, the school of the town of Sribne in the northern direction, and they were ambushed and FPV drones somewhere in this point. So based on this video, we can say that Ukrainians either are about to lose the settlement of Sribne or they have already done this, and maybe tomorrow this entire territory will be captured, will be colored by different mappers in Russian favor. Now let's discuss the situation in the city of Pokrovsk, because this is exactly what I was planning to talk about, and during the previous 24 hours we received lots of very interesting and strange updates that from Ukrainian side and from the Russian side as well. So you know that the situation is that during December, November and January of 2025, the Russians were trying to attack the southwestern flank of the city of Pokrovsk. The Russians were advancing, taking one village after another, and as a result of that offensive operation, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the settlement of Kotlina, and the Russians took under control the southeastern part of Udachno. So that offensive operation was more or less successful for the Russians, because they managed to cut one of the supply lines that Ukrainians use to support the forces on the territory of the city. Furthermore, different sources reported that the Russians also managed to establish complete FPV drone control over the M30 road that goes between the mainland, let's say, and the city of Pokrovsk itself. And this is the second road that Ukrainians use to support their forces and their contingent on the territory of the city of Pokrovsk. And there is another one road that goes in the northern direction through the settlement of Rodinske, but most likely this road Ukrainians still have possibilities to use, maybe with losses, but not with such losses we can see in the western direction. Anyway, we can say that as a result of Russian offensive, they managed to cut at least 2 supply lines, and the Russians stopped. And the Russians, maybe they were regrouping, maybe the weather was bad, so they didn't have any possibilities to continue offensive operation. Maybe the Russians managed to discover intelligence information that Ukrainians are planning to counterattack in the area of the city of Pokrovsk with the purpose to restore control over the territories they lost, because this is very important area, and the most important is that in the vicinity of Pokrovsk we can find probably the most important resources, the most important deposits of different rare resources that Ukrainians used to have. And I'll remind you that several days ago, more precisely today, we got reports that Trump, the United States of America, accepted Ukrainian suggestion, Ukrainian proposal to get Ukraine's rare deposit, rare metals in exchange for protection or some help. Today, for example, Trump's statements on rare earth metals is a part of the victory plan. So Ukrainians gave the Western countries everything they had: people, freedom, surface, land, water, air, everything, with one purpose: just to protect Ukrainians in this war with Russia. So this is the reason maybe the Ukrainians will try to counterattack in the area of Pokrovsk, because lots of mines are located in this area, mines that most likely already belong to the United States of America. So that's why the US is interested in restoring control over these territories. And during the previous 24 hours, most likely the Ukrainians began these counteroffensive operations with the purpose to restore control over these rare metals and rare deposits. First attack took place in the southwestern direction, and as a result of this counteroffensive operation, the Ukrainians managed to restore control at least over the eastern part of the settlement of Kotlina. We have video that confirmed this. In this video we can see how the Russian soldier was moving in the eastern part of Kotlina with the purpose to check positions. Maybe he got some information that some Ukrainian soldiers were discovered in this area. We don't know for sure, but the Russian soldier was moving exactly along this street, and somewhere at this point he decided to cross some wide street with the purpose to get another defense position, and during this process he was brought down by the Ukrainian sniper or something like this. So based on this video we came to conclusion that most likely the Ukrainians managed to counterattack and to restore control over this part of the village. This is very important settlement, because this is the part of deposit, this is the part of resources Ukraine promised to Donald Trump. So that's why we believe that we're gonna see continuous counterattacks from this area with the purpose to restore everything in this direction. Another counteroffensive operation took place a little bit further in the southeastern direction. The Ukrainians were counterattacking the Russians in the territory of the settlement of Peshana. And as you can see, there is another mine, another very important strategical industrial complex that Ukrainians used to use for their economy, for their steel, let's say, production, for many other spheres. And Ukrainians were earning a lot of money on this, using these plants and using these mines. And Ukrainians counterattacked, but this counterattack was less successful for the Ukrainians. In this video we can see and we can confirm that indeed the Ukrainians managed to enter the settlement of Peshana, but the Ukrainians were ambushed and completely destroyed. In this video we can see Bradley. We can see that the Ukrainians most likely made an attempt to evacuate. At least they opened the gates of this Bradley, but we will not continue watching this video because drone answered this door, and there was nobody already alive there. So this is the situation. Once again, the Ukrainians counterattacked in this area as well, but the Ukrainians were ambushed and destroyed in the most central part of the city. As for now, I believe we should change the map. We should color some territories along the railways in Ukrainian favor, but the video shows that the Ukrainians haven't managed to achieve anything in this area. So we are waiting for additional updates. Maybe we will adjust the map in the very near future. So this is the second counterattack from the Ukrainian side, and the third counterattack most likely took place in the area between the settlement of Pokrovsk and Lysovka. As you can see, the map has been changed. Let's take a look at the differences. This is, for example, the situation by the end of the 3rd of February. As you can see, all these territories were considered under control of the armed forces of Russian Federation. And today we have changes on the ground in a great contested area favor. We made these changes based on the reports that were published by the neutral mappers. So this is the situation, but telling the truth, I believe we should have colored this territory in Ukrainian favor based on the video that was published by the Ukrainian side. In this video we can see how the Russians were attacking in the area of Lysovka from the south-eastern direction. The Russians, using the infantry fighting vehicle, managed to enter the village itself. Russian troopers landed in this area, and then the Russians were ambushed. So the Russians were attacking in this area while moving in this direction. The Russians landed exactly in this part of the Palova street and were ambushed. So most likely the territory further in the northwestern direction, we're talking about this pocket and the entire village of Lysovka itself, is already under complete Ukrainian control. So summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that now the Ukrainians, due to the fact that they're located on the territory of Pokrovsk, this is a very powerful stronghold. There are lots of buildings, lots of underground facilities. So it's like a real stronghold. It's a real stronghold with the 3 years of experience of the armed forces of Ukraine behind their shoulders. And now the Ukrainians, when the Russians stopped, the Ukrainians began testing Russians' defense. The Ukrainians attack in here, the Ukrainians attack in this direction, the Ukrainians attack in this direction, to understand where is the weakest point of the armed force of Russian Federation, and if they find this point, most likely the Ukrainians will attack. So telling the truth, and something tells me that before the beginning of the negotiation process, the Ukrainians will do everything they can with the purpose to restore control over the rare metals and rare resources deposits exactly in the Donetsk direction, because according to information we have, 70% of rare and unique metals and deposits of different sources are located exactly on the territory of Dnipro, Lugansk and Donetsk, and 70% and most of these resources are already under control of Russian Federation. So from this perspective, Ukrainians will do everything they can to restore control over this territory and then to pay for the help of the United States of America. Now let's move further. Let's discuss the situation in the Konstantinovka direction. As you can see, during the previous 24 hours we got lots of icons. The most important is the concentration of these icons in the Kliban-Bytska water reservoir direction. The Russians, most likely after the operational pause finished regrouping, brought additional forces, FPV drones, and now the Russians during the previous 24 hours, the Russians were clearing this territory by attacking Ukrainian vehicles, equipment, communication. So the Russians did everything they can with the purpose to ease this the further progress of the soldiers on the ground. So we expect that maybe 2-3 days more the Russians will do the same. They will destroy everything that is coming in this area, and then they will begin the ground operation. The same story in the city of Chasiv Yar, but there is one important difference. During the previous days, we've been receiving a lot of updates exactly from the central blocks, from the central micro district, like the central part, like micro district of Shevchenka. There were lots of icons, FPV drones, strikes, artillery strikes. But now, as you can see, the main icons are coming from behind of the city of Chasiv Yar. For example, in this video, we can see several Ukrainian soldiers that were ambushed by the Russians and attacked by FPV drone. In this video, we can see the settlement of Nikolaevka that is located several kilometers to the west from the city of Chasiv Yar, and how the Russians were bombing and attacking the temporary deployment point or the stronghold of the armored forces of Ukraine. In the area of the settlement of Chervone, we got another video where we can see the Ukrainian base of FPV drone operators that was discovered by the Russian drones and destroyed as a result of artillery fire. We can see lots of videos from the settlement of Stupachki from the southern part. So as you can see, the Russians are moving focus first of all to destroy positions of the armored forces of Ukraine, or maybe another reason, maybe the Russians are already about to finish the battle for the central part. So anyway, sooner or later the situation will be resolved here, and the Russians will be able to begin advancing further. As for the serious direction, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything special, just the regular activities. Russians were bombing Ukrainian positions, Ukrainians were counter-attacking the Russians. As for the Liman direction, according to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the area of Ivanovka. So as you can see, the Russians are not planning to stop. Every single day they improve their foothold on the Ukrainian side of the river of Zherebets. They need this. They need to have a very powerful and strong positions with the purpose to concentrate a critical mass, and then they will be able to advance further. As for the northern Kupiansk direction, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians intensified their activities by bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions in the area of Petropavlovka. Maybe this activity tells us that the Russians are about to begin another offensive operation in this area, so let's wait and see. And now let's discuss the situation in the Kharkiv direction. Today the sources reported that the Russians are preparing themselves to repel upcoming Ukraine offensive operation. So this is another area where the Ukrainians may try to attack Russian positions with the purpose to restore control over Kharkiv area completely, maybe to cross the border and to begin offensive in the direction of Belgorod. So if Ukrainians begin offensive in Belgorod, this might be a turning point in the special military operation. I'm not talking about so that Ukrainians will be able to let's say restore everything by the borders of 1991. I'm just telling you that the Russians can enter another level when talking about different weapons they can use against the Ukrainian forces. As for the Sudzha direction, during the previous 24 hours the Russians continue their control over the main supply roads, and as a result of intelligence reconnaissance operation, the Russians managed to discover the concentration of the forces of the 36th Marine Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine, and as a result of Tornado S missile strike with the cluster munition, the entire battalion most likely was completely destroyed. The Ukrainians lost up to 20 armored vehicles, up to 15 transport vehicles, and around 100 soldiers. So Ukraine suffered losses, and as you can see, this attack with the cluster rounds took place in the vicinity of the settlement of Pisarevka, the area that is under complete Russian FPV drone control. So the situation is very difficult, and the most important that Ukrainians will counterattack. Obviously, Ukrainians will counterattack, and they will do something like, I don't know, this counterattack is going to be completely in the US favor and planned by the US because we have lots of statements made by Trump, and we have the most important is that the United States of America have resumed the deliveries of arms to Ukraine. And this can mean just one, that Ukrainians are preparing themselves before another offensive operation. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.